G'day guys, Dean here from Blog for the Blood God, and today I want to talk to you about the sunk cost fallacy. I want to talk about a little bit about what this fallacy is, give you some real world examples, and then also give you some examples of how it can affect you in your games of Warhammer 40k and affect your Warhammer 40k results in tournaments. So with that being said, we're going to jump straight into the video, but don't forget to like, subscribe, and fill that comment section. Let's get a conversation going down there, and let's jump straight into the video.
Blog for the Blood God.
Alright, first of all, let's break down what the sunk cost fallacy actually is. The sunk cost fallacy is the phenomenon where a person is reluctant to abandon their strategy or course of action because they have already invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandoning that strategy or course of action would be more beneficial. The sunk cost fallacy is the temptation to prioritize the costs already incurred when making decisions for the future, and it is identifiable by the thought, oh, I have already X, therefore I should Y. So I'm sure we can all think of a dozen examples off the top of my head of situations where you've found yourself making decisions for the future based off what has happened in the past, and that's the sunk cost fallacy. It's when you need to go, okay, cool, I've made investments, they haven't worked out, I need to change strategy and try basing my decisions off what I'm planning for the future, not based off what I've already spent or the costs I've already incurred in the past. Alright, now let's talk about some of the various causes for the sunk cost fallacy. People are wired for cost aversion. This leads us to a strong desire to justify any costs as necessary and good, even when they were bad or mistakes. And people often overvalue what they have lost, and as a result, often lose more in an attempt to justify that loss. So this is talking about how, there'll be times when you'll make mistakes, and instead of acknowledging that that was a mistake and trying to move on, you end up spending more resources and more time trying to justify that mistake. So you've done something that hasn't worked out, and instead of moving on, you cling on to those mistakes from the past. This is natural human behavior, and it translates into all aspects of life, and that's what creates the sunk cost fallacy. All right, now I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to give you some real world examples to show you just exactly how pervasive the sunk cost fallacy can be. So the first is if you're watching a bad movie till the end because you've already spent money on the ticket. I'm sure you've all had experiences where you've paid money to go to the cinema, and then you've started watching the movie and you're like, this movie is just garbage, and you go, oh, but I've already paid for the ticket, I've already got my popcorn, I might as well sit here and watch it out to the end. When in reality, you're wasting your time because you know the movie's bad. You would be better off going home and watching something on Netflix that you know you're going to enjoy, because you're never going to recover the costs of that movie ticket. So letting the costs of that movie ticket, that sunk cost, dictate your decisions will result in you making a bad decision, because now instead of being at home watching something you enjoy, you're stuck watching something that you don't enjoy. Another example is staying in a toxic relationship because you have already invested the time. We've all been in those situations where you've been in a relationship for 5 or 6 years and it turns south, and then you're like, okay, this relationship isn't working, she's being a bitch or he's being an asshole, whatever it is, but you stay in the relationship because you're like, yeah, but we've got, we've lived together, we've got investments, we've got kids, we've got all of these various commitments, and you're like, okay, well, we need to stay, but what you're doing there is you're falling victim to the sunk cost fallacy. Instead of looking at how much time you have spent with a person, you should be looking forward into the future and thinking about what you can do with that. So, for example, one way to look at this one is if you were to walk into that relationship as a fresh one and they were behaving in a toxic manner, would you stay? No. So that means that the reason that you're staying is because you're looking at the past and letting it control the future. And that's the sunk cost fallacy. Another example is sinking further costs into a failing investment because you have already invested the capital. So this is an economic principle. This is the way it works in businesses, where it's like, okay, you invest a bunch of money into developing a new product and that product's not selling, so you could just abandon the enterprise, or you can invest even more money into maybe refining or redeveloping the product and try to sell it that way. And in reality, you're just sinking more costs into an abandoned worthy enterprise, right? So the sunk cost fallacy, if you're conscious of it, it would advise that instead of continuing with that, you take your money, you take your losses, and then you go and you try to start something different. Another good example that we can probably all relate to is when you're starting a diet, but you finish off any of the junk food that you have in the fridge as you've already bought it. I don't know how many times I've decided, you know what, no more sugar, I'm cutting sugar out of my diet, and then I open the freezer and there's a bowl of ice cream, a bucket of ice cream in there, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to throw that in the bin. Like, I'll just eat this now, and then I'll start my diet tomorrow, you know? And it's like, well, that's the sunk cost fallacy. You've already paid for the ice cream, sure, but if you decide no more ice cream, well, whether or not you already have ice cream should be irrelevant. You've decided the correct course of action is to cut that out of your diet. You should just throw that ice cream in the bin or donate it or something like that. But you don't want to be going, okay, well, I guess I already bought the ice cream, so now I should eat it, and go back on the decision that you've already made for your own benefit. Another one is continuing with a YouTube channel because you've invested a lot of time and money into it, and you're just praying that people will sign up to your Patreon, links in the description, despite the fact that it's at this rate, it would take years for you to just break even. All right, so I want to know from you, have you experienced this sunk cost fallacy in your life? You know, give me some examples, chuck them in the comments below, pause the video here, have a think about it, and chuck some comments below. Let's get a conversation going about some real world examples of how the sunk cost fallacy has affected you. All right, now let's switch over to the Warhammer 40k component of this video. I want to break down how this actually impacts your Warhammer 40k specifically. So there's going to be some examples here that we'll go through, and yeah, let's jump straight into it. So the first example is sticking with an army that you no longer enjoy or are no longer getting good results with just because you already own the models. We've all been in these situations where you've bought an army and it's become outdated, the rules aren't there, or maybe it's just the play style doesn't suit you personally and you've realized, oh, well, I bought an all combat army, but combat's too clunky, it's too much movement, it's too, you know, this, that, whatever. I really wish I had shooting available because I've played with that a little bit, it's a lot more fun, but I'm going to stick with my combat army because it's the models I have. Well, that's the sunk cost fallacy coming into play, where you're looking at the models that you've already purchased and you're looking at that and making a decision based on that. Whereas what you should be doing is going, okay, cool, maybe I'm gonna sell that and buy a different army, or maybe I'm gonna pivot, you know, into a different faction going forward and slowly build it over time and keep playing this one until I have built up enough to start playing this other faction that more suits your play style. That would be the healthier, more appropriate response. Whereas we often fall prey to the sunk cost fallacy of continuing to build up an army that we no longer enjoy, and it kills the joy out of the entire game. Another, this one's more specific to playing on the tabletop, is sticking with a game plan that is not working as you have already committed resources. So this happens all the time on the tabletop. You'll come up with a plan at the start of the game. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. It might be something like I'm going to play really defensively and I'm going to just, you know, throw out units for engage on all fronts, but I'm going to focus on holding my own backfield. You know, that might be your game plan at the start. So you allocate those resources. You know, you put things in certain quarters so that they can achieve that, you know, engage on all fronts. You make sure you have some units in reinforcements so that you can drop in consecutive turns to continue scoring that engage on all fronts. And you set up multiple units on your backfield objectives to defend them. But then your opponent goes really, really hard and blows out one of your flanks, kills a whole bunch of your stuff. And now you look at it and you're like, okay, I have an opportunity here to fight back and do some serious damage, but I've already committed to the engage on all fronts play, right? So instead of pivoting with the new information of what your opponent's done, a lot of people will stick with the engage on all fronts play because they've already committed the resources. Whereas in reality, what they should do is just bring in all of their reinforcements now and cripple their opponent. You know, abandon your engage on all fronts play, take this opportunity to cripple your opponent with the new information that you have. Avoid that sunk cost. You've already put the units that are over in that quarter that are no longer relevant, because if you are going to pivot into a more aggressive play style, you know, doesn't matter if they're over there, they were a sunk cost. You know, you've wasted those units, that's fine. Take your opportunities where you can, pivot and change your game plan as appropriate. Another example from the tabletop is continuing to target units that won't die because you've already allocated damage to it. Now this one is huge, and I've seen this so many times playing Chaos Space Marine Terminators at the moment, but throughout my entire 40k career playing those durable units, the amount of times that an opponent will drop something in, or move something, or do whatever, they'll shoot at it, and then they'll realize, wow, I just fired this really powerful unit and did no damage, right? But then they'll be like, oh, well, you know, maybe they killed one Terminator out of 10, right? So then they go, oh, well, fuck, I guess I've already committed to killing the Terminators. So they go all in, and they just keep wasting all of their damage into the Terminators. When in reality, they should have fired that first unit, realized, wow, those Terminators are not going to fucking die. So with these other 5 units, I'm going to target other stuff that will die, you know? Whereas what I see a lot of people do is they fall prey to the sunk cost of, I've already allocated into that unit, you know, maybe it's a Tau army and they put their marker lights on the Terminator unit, and then they shoot the first Riptide and realize it kills 1 Terminator. And realistically, they should then, with their crisis suits and their other stuff, they should go kill other things. But they look at it and they're like, oh, I've already put my marker lights there, I've already killed 1, you know, maybe I should just continue with this game plan. But that's the sunk cost fallacy, taking advantage of them. Another is trying to scrape points out of a bad secondary at the cost of your overall game plan for primary, etc. Now, this one's another really, really big one, where what'll often happen is you'll pick your secondaries at the start of the game, and sometimes you'll pick bad. You'll pick a bad secondary, and then you'll realize early in the game, fuck, I'm going to really struggle to get points out of this. But what people do is they keep trying really, really hard to scrape those points, when in reality, that effort and those resources that they're allocating would be better spent elsewhere. So it might be something like, you know, behind enemy lines, and you keep throwing units into behind enemy lines, but your opponent keeps screening you out. They've screened you out the first couple turns. It's really, really hard for you to get in there. So instead of continuing to try to throw those units behind them and try to allocate resources to popping holes specifically so that you can pull off this crazy combo to get things in their deployment zone, maybe you're better off just going, okay, cool, I'm going to accept that I'm only going to get like 4 points for behind enemy lines, and I'm just going to focus on making sure that I secure my primary and secure my other secondaries that were good choices, and focus on that part of the game plan. Just because you've spent the opportunity cost of your secondary objective selecting behind enemy lines doesn't mean you have to continue to pursue it for the entire game. Sometimes you need to just go, cool, I fucked up, that was a bad secondary, I'm going to focus on maxing the good secondaries and maxing my primary, and just let that sunk cost go. Don't let that sunk cost dictate your game plan, because that will cost you results. And another one is relying on an expensive unit when it is not particularly useful in a specific matchup just because it's a lot of points invested. I see a lot of people make this mistake where they'll design their list where it's a whole bunch of synergy designed to get the maximum utility out of a particular unit. They'll build all of these combos in, but sometimes that unit's not particularly useful in specific matchups. So what you need to do in those situations is pivot and go, okay, maybe my Psyker, instead of casting defensive buffs on this unit, he's actually going to cast Smite, you know, to do some damage. You know, maybe your characters that have the buffs, instead of them just hiding in the center of a unit, maybe they actually need to jump out and fight things, you know? Maybe you need to abandon that, you know, Death Star style of gameplay, because in this particular matchup, it's not very good. You know, it might be because your opponent's so fast, they just fly away from your Death Star. You know, and it's not exclusive to Death Stars either. There are plenty of other examples of where people have come up with game plans. Maybe they've purchased a transport for their unit, you know, and their game plan is it's big expensive transport, so my unit goes inside and it moves up and it jumps out and it does the damage. But maybe in a particular game plan, your opponent's going to be able to stay outside of that range and they're going to blow up your transport early. So maybe the play there is to go, cool, I'm not going to use it as a transport. Maybe it's a Land Raider. Maybe you go, cool, I'm going to deploy it, and then I'm going to put my troops in reinforcements instead of putting them inside the transport. And now, yep, cool, they're going to blow up your transport anyway, but now you haven't, you know, let the fact that it's a transport dictate what goes inside. Maybe they come in from reserves and then go for a 9-inch charge. Maybe that's a better game plan. So the idea here is you might have sunk the costs into the transport, or you might have sunk the costs into the Death Star or some other component in your list that's a particularly expensive and powerful combo, but that's not always going to be the best plan. And when you identify that it isn't the best plan, you need to be able to rapidly abandon that plan and pivot into something new. So chuck some comments below. Let me know what you think. Have you experienced the sunk cost fallacy in your games of Warhammer 40k? Have you ever found yourself going, I bought this model, it's my favorite model, I love it, therefore I want to write it into every list, even though it's bad? You know, that's an example of the sunk cost fallacy, where you realistically should be going, oh cool, he's part of my collection, but my army that I'm going to take to events is going to include more competitive units, right? that's an example of a sunk cost fallacy. Have you had any examples? Let me know in the comments below so that we can all learn off of each other's mistakes. All right, and now let's round out the video with a quick explanation on how to avoid the sunk cost fallacy. First and most important step is to identify the cause and be aware of the various forms of the fallacy takes. Once you know how to identify it, consciously trying to counter its effects by discounting past costs and focusing purely on the current situation when making decisions for the future. This is absolutely key. Anytime you find yourself thinking, I've already X, or I already Y, or any of that sort of stuff, you need to go, well, no, it doesn't matter what I've already done. All that matters is what's in front of me, what the future is, and what my current situation is. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past. You look at your current situation and the future, and you come up with a game plan. That's the key to avoiding the sunk cost fallacy. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and a huge shout out to my Patreons. Thank you guys so much. You've made this channel possible with new equipment, new lighting, new microphones, all of these sorts of things I'm able to do in the future thanks to the donations through Patreon. So a huge shout out to them, and also a huge shout out to those who like, subscribe, comment, and do all of the various things, get the conversations going in the comment section. That really helps drive the YouTube algorithm, and that alone helps the channel grow. So if you want to help out, but you don't want to go through the financial means, then that's completely understandable. And you can do that via comments, liking, subscribing, and sharing this video. So thanks again, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
One for the blood god.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment, he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the blood god, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the blood god, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not one, not two, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today.